I knew something was wrong before I even turned onto my street. The sky wasn't just dark. It was glowing. Orange. The kind of orange that doesn't belong in the middle of a quiet suburban neighborhood at 2:30 in the morning. I remember pressing harder on the gas pedal, convincing myself it couldn't possibly be my house. There were dozens of homes on my street. Fires happened. Maybe someone's grill exploded. Maybe a garage caught fire. Then I saw the fire trucks. 3 of them. Their red lights bounced off every parked car, every mailbox, every window. People stood outside in their pajamas, wrapped in blankets, watching my home burn. I slammed on the brakes, so hard the tires screamed. No! Before the car had completely stopped, I was already running. My house! A firefighter caught me before I reached the front yard. You can't go in. My dog! His grip tightened. We already searched. What do you mean you searched? I'm sorry. Those 2 words didn't register. Sorry. Sorry for what? I stared at him as flames punched through the roof I'd spent 7 years paying for. The living room windows exploded. Glass rained across the lawn. The maple tree my dad planted when I bought the place caught fire next. Everything I owned. Every photograph. Every birthday card from my late grandmother. My wedding album. The quilt my mother had sewn before she stopped speaking to me. Gone. Just gone. Someone behind me whispered my name. I turned. My younger sister, Emily, stood beside our parents. None of them moved. None of them hugged me. My mother folded her arms. I told you that old wiring would catch up with you. I blinked. What? You never listened. My father nodded. You always thought you knew better. I looked from one face to another, certain I'd misunderstood. My house is burning. Emily shrugged. What do you expect us to do? I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because my brain refused to accept what I was hearing. I don't know. Maybe ask if I'm okay? Silence. Then my mother sighed dramatically. You've always been irresponsible. The words hit harder than the heat coming off the flames. Irresponsible. I had spent years helping every one of them. When Dad needed money after retiring early, I gave it. When Emily lost her apartment, she lived with me for 8 months. When Mom had knee surgery, I took unpaid leave to drive her to appointments. Now I was standing in front of a burning house. And somehow this was my fault. By sunrise, there wasn't much left. The roof had collapsed. The second floor was gone. Firefighters sprayed smoking beams while investigators walked around taking photographs. Someone handed me a blanket. Someone else gave me bottled water. My family had already left. Not one of them asked where I was going. Not one offered me a place to stay. I sat on the curb until the sun came up. Then my phone buzzed. Mom. For one ridiculous second, I thought she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd realized how cruel she'd been. I answered immediately. Mom, you should call your insurance company. That's why you're calling. You'll need somewhere to live. I know. Well. Silence. Then she added, we don't have room. I stared at the burned shell of my house. You didn't even ask. What? You didn't ask me to stay. Another pause. It wouldn't work. I laughed again. That strange hollow laugh. I never asked. We just assumed. Then she hung up. I spent the next week living in a cheap motel 20 minutes away. Insurance approved emergency housing, but paperwork moved slowly. Every morning I drove back to my property. Not because there was anything left. Because I couldn't believe it was gone. Neighbors stopped by constantly. Mrs. Alvarez from across the street brought coffee. I'm so sorry. Mr. Donnelly offered tools if I needed to recover anything. The teenage boy next door helped me search through debris for jewelry. Strangers showed me more kindness than my own family. On the 5th day, Emily finally texted. Emily, have you figured everything out yet? That was it. No, how are you? No, I'm sorry. Just, have you figured everything out yet? I replied. Me, no. She didn't answer. A week later, I met with my insurance adjuster. His name was Kevin. Late 40s. Calm voice. The kind of person who had clearly delivered bad news thousands of times. He spread photographs across the table. The fire started here. He pointed toward what had once been my kitchen. I thought the firefighters said electrical. They suspected electrical. Suspected. He looked uncomfortable. The official cause hasn't been determined. So what does that mean? It means investigators are still examining evidence. I frowned. How long does that take? Sometimes weeks. Something in his tone caught my attention. What aren't you telling me? He hesitated, then carefully chose his words. They found something unusual. What? I can't discuss an active investigation. My stomach tightened. Was someone hurt? No. Then tell me. I'm sorry. That was all he would say. 2 days later, I met my friend Marcus for lunch. Marcus had been my best friend since college. He listened without interrupting while I vented about my family. When I finished, he leaned back. Can I ask something? Sure. Has your family always treated you like this? I opened my mouth. Stopped. Thought about it. Actually thought. Growing up, I had always been the dependable one. Emily got into trouble. I fixed it. Dad made bad investments. I covered bills. Mom fought with relatives. I apologized on her behalf. I'd always called it helping. Marcus called it something else. They've been using you. I don't think. They didn't even offer you a couch. They're stressed. He stared at me. Your house burned down. I looked away. Because deep down, I knew he was right. That evening I stopped by my parents' house. Not because I expected comfort. Because I needed answers. Dad answered the door. You should have called. I wanted to talk. We're eating. I'll be quick. Mom appeared behind him. What now? I looked at both of them. I lost everything. Mom crossed her arms. You still have your job. I know. You have insurance. I know. So what's the problem? I couldn't believe this conversation. The problem is my family doesn't seem to care. Emily walked into the hallway. Oh my God, are we still talking about this? I stared. Still talking about this? She rolled her eyes. You're acting like you're the only person who's ever had something bad happen. My house burned down. And the word echoed inside my head. And Dad stepped forward. You've always been dramatic. Something broke inside me. Not loudly. Quietly. Like a thread, finally snapping after years of tension. I looked at every face. Then nodded once. Okay. Mom frowned. Okay, what? I understand. Dad seemed confused. Understand what? I finally understand exactly who my family is. I turned around. No yelling. No crying. No insults. Just walked away. None of them followed. 3 days later, my insurance company approved a rental house across town. Small. Plain. Furnished. Temporary. It didn't matter. It had walls. A bed. A kitchen. I should have felt grateful. Instead, it felt empty. Every night I replayed the fire. The flames. My mother's words. Emily's shrug. Dad's disappointment. Then one afternoon my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Is this Daniel Carter? Yes. This is Detective Harris with the County Fire Investigation Unit. Every muscle in my body tightened. We've completed the initial examination. Okay. We'd like you to come in tomorrow morning. Why? We have a few questions. My heart started racing. Questions about what? A pause. Then, the origin of the fire. Did you figure out what caused it? Another pause. We'll explain everything when you arrive. The line went dead. I barely slept that night. Every possible explanation ran through my head. Faulty wiring. Gas leak. Lightning. Someone smoking. Anything. The next morning I arrived 15 minutes early. Detective Harris greeted me in a small interview room. He wasn't intimidating. Just tired. Like someone who'd spent too many years seeing terrible things. He placed a folder on the table. Inside were photographs. Close-ups I'd never seen before. Burn patterns. Charred floorboards. Melted metal. He slid one picture toward me. Do you recognize this? It showed the remains of a red plastic container. I squinted. No. It tested positive for gasoline. I looked up slowly. What? We recovered traces of an accelerant. My mouth went dry. I'm sorry. I whispered. What does that mean? Detective Harris held my gaze. It means your house didn't accidentally catch fire. He let the silence settle, then said the words that changed everything. It was intentionally set. I didn't answer Detective Harris right away. I couldn't. The words, intentionally set, kept echoing in my head like someone shouting inside an empty room. Arson. Not an accident. Someone hadn't just burned my house. Someone had chosen to burn my house. I swallowed hard. Are you sure? Harris nodded once. We don't tell homeowners something like this unless we're confident. He opened the folder again. There were multiple points of origin. The fire started in more than one location inside the house. I stared at the photographs. The kitchen, the hallway, the base of the staircase. Electrical fires don't do that, he said quietly. Someone used gasoline. I leaned back in my chair. I don't have enemies. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he folded his hands. Most victims say that. The interview lasted almost 2 hours. They asked about everyone who had access to my home. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, contractors, former partners, family. When Harris asked about family, I hesitated. My parents have a spare key. He wrote something down. My sister did too. Another note. Anyone else? No. He looked up. Any recent arguments? I almost laughed. With my family? He waited. They've been upset with me for months. Why? My parents wanted me to co-sign a loan. And did you? No. Why not? Because Dad already defaulted on 2 loans. Harris nodded. Anything else? My sister asked me to invest in a business. What business? I honestly don't know. You turned her down? Yes. How did she react? She said I thought I was better than everyone. He didn't comment. He simply kept writing. When I left the station, my phone buzzed. Emily. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. What? Where are you? Why? Mom said you've been acting weird. I closed my eyes. My house was burned down. I know. It wasn't an accident. Silence. Longer than I expected. What do you mean? The investigators found gasoline. Another pause. Then. Wow. Just. Wow. No surprise. No concern. No questions. Just one word. Something about her voice bothered me. She sounded careful. Almost like she was measuring every sentence. Finally she said, well, I hope they figure it out. Then she ended the call. I looked at my phone. Something felt wrong. I couldn't explain why. But for the first time, I wondered if my family knew more than they were saying. That weekend, I went back to the property. Most of the debris had been cleared into neat piles. The smell was different now. Less smoke. More wet ash and burned wood. A man in work boots waved at me. You Daniel? Yeah. I'm Steve. He pointed toward the back fence. I live behind you. I recognized him immediately. Quiet guy. Always gardening. We'd only spoken a handful of times. I've been meaning to tell you something. What is it? He scratched his beard. I wasn't sure it mattered before. My stomach tightened. What? The night of the fire. He looked toward my driveway. I saw a car. What kind? I don't know. Color. Dark. SUV maybe. I frowned. There are always cars. He shook his head. This one was parked in your driveway. My heartbeat sped up. What time? About midnight. I wasn't home. I know. Did you see anyone? No. How long was it there? Maybe 15 minutes. Did you tell investigators? They never asked. I thanked him and immediately called Detective Harris. An hour later, Harris called back. That's helpful. You think it matters? It might. What now? We'll check nearby security cameras. I thought none face my house. They don't. He paused. But streets connect. For the first time since the fire, I felt something. Hope. 3 days passed. Nothing. Then Marcus invited me over for dinner. His wife made lasagna. Their 2 kids argued over garlic bread. It was loud, messy, normal. Halfway through dinner, Marcus looked at me. You've barely touched your food. I'm trying. You don't have to pretend you're okay. I smiled weakly. I'm tired. His wife reached across the table. You know you can stay here. I looked at her. You've already done enough. You'd do the same. The words hit me harder than she intended. Because she was right. That's what family was supposed to do. Support each other. Not blame each other. Not disappear. Not act inconvenienced by tragedy. When I got back to my rental that night, it felt even emptier. The next morning, Detective Harris called again. We found the SUV. I nearly dropped my coffee. What? Traffic camera. When? 11:56 p.m. Can you see the license plate? No. My excitement faded. It's too blurry. But, he continued, we know the make. What is it? A black Ford Explorer. I froze. Emily drove a black Ford Explorer. No. There had to be thousands of them. Thousands. It couldn't mean anything. Right. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house. Not to accuse anyone. Just to look. Emily's SUV sat in the driveway. Black. Exactly like Detective Harris described. I walked around it slowly. The passenger side had a fresh scratch. I didn't remember seeing that before. Emily stepped outside. What are you doing? I forced a smile. Looking at your car. Why? No reason. She folded her arms. That's weird. I looked at her. Were you out late the night of the fire? Her expression changed. Only for a second. Barely noticeable. Then she laughed. I was home. All night. Yes. You sure? She stepped closer. What are you implying? Nothing. You think I burned your house. I didn't say that. But you're thinking it. I held her gaze. She looked away first. I have to go. She got into the SUV and drove away. I stood there long after she disappeared. Something wasn't adding up. That evening, Detective Harris called again. We need another interview. Why? We spoke with your sister. I stopped pacing. And there are inconsistencies. What kind? I'd rather discuss them in person. The next day, Harris placed 2 sheets of paper on the table. Your sister says she never left home that night. Okay. He slid another paper toward me. Her cell phone disagrees. I stared. Cell tower records. 11:48 p.m. A tower less than 2 miles from my house. 12:07 a.m. Another nearby tower. 1:03 a.m. Back near your parents' neighborhood. I looked up. She lied. She did. My pulse pounded in my ears. Did she do it? We don't know. What else? Harris leaned back. She claimed someone borrowed her vehicle. I blinked. What? Yesterday she insisted she never left home. And now she says her friend borrowed the SUV. Which friend? She can't remember. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. You can't remember who borrowed your car? Harris didn't smile. People generally remember something like that. As I left the station, another memory surfaced. One I'd completely forgotten. About 6 weeks before the fire, Emily had asked an odd question. We'd been standing in my kitchen. She looked around and casually asked, So, if your house ever burned down? I'd laughed. What kind of question is that? I'm just saying. She smiled. Insurance would replace everything, right? At the time, it seemed random. Now, it made my skin crawl. That night I searched through old text messages. Scrolling. Months of conversations. Then I found it. A message from Emily. 3 weeks before the fire. Emily, have you updated your homeowner's insurance lately? I'd replied, Yeah. Why? Her answer, Just curious. I stared at the screen. Why would she ask that? I forwarded the screenshot to Detective Harris. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. Don't delete anything, he said. I'm not. Save every text. Okay. We're applying for additional warrants. Warrants? We're expanding the investigation. The following afternoon, I received another surprise. A call from my insurance adjuster, Kevin. We found something. What? There was an inquiry made about your homeowner's policy. When? About 10 days before the fire. I didn't call. We know. My stomach dropped. Who did? The caller identified themselves as your sister. I nearly stopped breathing. What? They asked detailed questions. What kind? Coverage limits. I closed my eyes. Replacement value. Temporary housing. Personal property coverage. Kevin continued. They also asked how quickly claims were usually paid. I felt sick. I never authorized that. We know. How could she get information? She knew your date of birth. My knees weakened. The room suddenly felt too small. That evening, I drove without thinking. I ended up outside my parents' house again. Lights glowed through the windows. Laughter drifted outside. They were having dinner. Together. Like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't lost everything. I almost knocked. Instead, I sat in my car, watching. Then something caught my attention. Dad carried several cardboard boxes into the garage. One box split open. Papers spilled onto the driveway. He looked around nervously before stuffing everything back inside. The label on one folder flashed in the porch light. I could only read 2 words. Property deeds. My heartbeat quickened. Why were they moving property documents around? What were they hiding? Before I could think any further, my phone rang. Detective Harris. His voice was lower than usual. Daniel, what happened? We executed a search warrant today. Where? Your sister's SUV. I gripped the steering wheel. And there was a long pause. Too long. Finally he said, we found something in the cargo area. My mouth went dry. What? A partially burned gas can. I couldn't breathe. Harris continued quietly. And Daniel? Yes. The forensic team just matched traces of gasoline from that container to the accelerant used inside your house. The world around me seemed to stop. Cars drove past. Dogs barked somewhere in the distance. But all I could hear were Detective Harris's final words. We're no longer treating your sister as a witness. Another pause. Then, she's now the primary suspect. For a long time after Detective Harris hung up, I just sat in my car. The porch light at my parents' house glowed softly against the evening sky. Inside, I could still hear laughter. Someone opened the back door. Emily stepped onto the patio, carrying a glass of iced tea. She looked relaxed, comfortable, like she didn't have a care in the world. I stared at her through the windshield, trying to connect the woman in front of me with the words I'd just heard. Primary suspect. The phrase didn't fit. This was my little sister. The girl who used to follow me around the backyard with scraped knees and missing shoelaces. The teenager I'd picked up after her first breakup because she was too embarrassed to call our parents. The woman I'd loaned money to more times than I could count. Had she really? No. I couldn't let emotion replace facts. I started the engine and drove away. The next morning, Detective Harris met me outside the county office instead of the police station. We're keeping things quieter now, he explained. Why? We don't want anyone destroying evidence. The word anyone caught my attention. You don't think Emily acted alone? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he unlocked a conference room and motioned for me to sit. We've learned something interesting. He laid several documents across the table. Bank statements, property records, loan applications. At first glance, they meant nothing. Then he pointed to one line. Recognize this address? It was my house. My stomach tightened. What about it? 3 months before the fire, someone requested an estimated market valuation. I didn't. We know. So who did? He slid another paper toward me. The request had been made online. The email address belonged to Emily. I rubbed my temples. This doesn't make sense. Maybe not yet. Harris tapped another page. Look at the date. It was exactly 2 days after Dad had asked me to co-sign another loan. The one I'd refused. A cold feeling spread through my chest. Why would they need my home's value? Harris folded his hands. We're trying to answer that. That afternoon, I couldn't concentrate at work. Emails blurred together. Meetings felt pointless. Around lunch, Marcus called. You sound awful. I just found out Emily looked up my property's value before the fire. Silence. Then, have you checked public records lately? What do you mean? Just humor me. An hour later, I was sitting at the county records office. A clerk helped me pull up documents related to my property. Most were routine. Purchase records, tax assessments, mortgage filings. Then one document caught my eye. A lien inquiry. I frowned. I never requested this. The clerk leaned closer. It wasn't filed. It wasn't. No. She pointed to the status. Someone started the application but never completed it. Can I see who? I'm sorry. She shook her head. Only law enforcement can request that information. When I told Harris, he simply nodded. We already know. You do. The inquiry originated from the same IP address used to value your home. My sister. Yes. I leaned back in disbelief. So she was checking my house's value and trying to place a lien? We don't know if that was the goal. But she was planning something. It certainly appears she was gathering financial information. 2 days later, the investigation exploded in an entirely different direction. Detective Harris called before sunrise. I need you to come in. His tone told me this wasn't routine. When I arrived, Another woman was waiting in the room. Daniel, this is Special Investigator Karen Mills. She specialized in financial crimes. Financial crimes? I looked between them. I thought this was an arson case. It is, Mills said. But sometimes arson is only one piece of a larger puzzle. She opened a thick binder. We subpoenaed Emily's financial records. I expected credit card debt, maybe unpaid bills. What I didn't expect was the total. $286,000? Karen nodded. Personal loans, credit cards, business financing, private lenders. My mouth fell open. She owes almost $300,000, and most of it became delinquent within the last year. I remembered Emily's business idea. I'd never asked many questions because she'd brushed me off. Apparently I should have. What kind of business was it? Karen sighed. That's the interesting part. It doesn't exist. What? The company was legally registered, but it never operated. No employees, no revenue, no clients. It borrowed money, then disappeared. I stared at the paperwork. So where did the money go? We're still tracing it. The deeper investigators dug, the stranger everything became. Emily hadn't just been drowning in debt. Dad had been quietly refinancing the family home. Twice. Mom had taken out a home equity loan without telling anyone outside the immediate family. Every one of them was under enormous financial pressure. Yet whenever I visited, they acted perfectly normal. Sunday dinners, birthday parties, family barbecues. No one mentioned money. Not once. Then Karen showed me something that made my blood run cold. A photocopy of my signature. Only, it wasn't mine. At least not exactly. It looked convincing. Close enough that most people wouldn't notice. But I noticed immediately. The D in Daniel curved the wrong direction. The C in Carter was too small. Someone had practiced writing my name. Over, and over, and over again, until they could almost copy it. What is this? Karen looked directly at me. A loan application. For what? A line of credit. In your name. I felt sick. I never signed this. We know. It was rejected because the signature verification software flagged inconsistencies. Someone had tried to borrow money, pretending to be me. Detective Harris leaned forward. The application listed an emergency contact. I already knew the answer. Emily. He nodded. And your parents' home address. I drove straight to my parents' house. This time I wasn't there for comfort. I wanted the truth. Dad answered. His smile disappeared the moment he saw my face. What happened? I held up copies of the forged documents. You tell me. His expression changed instantly. Confusion. Then panic. Then anger. I don't know what those are. Liar. Mom walked into the hallway. What's going on? I handed her the papers. She barely glanced at them. I've never seen these. You expect me to believe that? Emily appeared from the kitchen. The second she saw the paperwork, she froze, only for a heartbeat. But I saw it. You forged my signature. Her face hardened. I did no such thing. The investigators traced everything back to you. Dad stepped between us. That's enough. No. I looked at all three of them. My house burns down. My insurance gets investigated. My signature is forged. And somehow all roads lead back here. Emily laughed. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't embarrassed. It was dismissive. You're so dramatic. Those words. Again. Always those words. I took one step closer. Did you burn my house? She stared directly into my eyes. No. It was calm. Confident. Almost rehearsed. For one brief moment, I wondered if I'd been wrong. Then Detective Harris's words echoed in my mind. People lie. Evidence doesn't. As I turned to leave, Mom called after me. You really think we'd hurt you? I stopped without looking back. I didn't. My voice cracked. But I'm starting to think none of you cared if someone else did. That night Detective Harris called again. We've identified fingerprints on the gas can. My pulse quickened. Emily! No. I froze. What? They don't belong to your sister. Every theory I'd built collapsed instantly. Then whose are they? We're identifying them now. So Emily didn't do it? I didn't say that. He paused. She may not have acted alone. Sleep became impossible. Every answer created two new questions. If Emily's fingerprints weren't on the gas can, who carried it? Who poured the gasoline? Who lit the match? The next afternoon, Harris invited me to observe something from another room. An interview. Through the one-way glass, I watched Emily sit across from two detectives. She looked exhausted. For the first time since the fire, she seemed genuinely frightened. Did you ask about your brother's insurance policy? Yes. Why? I was curious. Did you value his house? Yes. Why? I was helping him. Helping him how? I wanted to know if he should sell. Did you forge his signature? No. Who did? I don't know. The detective slid a photograph across the table. The burned gas can. Emily's face lost all color. Have you ever seen this? No. You've never purchased gasoline? Everyone buys gasoline. For containers? No. The detective leaned closer. Emily, we have surveillance footage from a hardware store. She blinked. What? A person bought that exact model gas can. She swallowed. It wasn't me. Would you like to see the video? Emily hesitated. For the first time, she asked for a lawyer. An hour later, Harris joined me. That was fast. People ask for attorneys when they feel trapped. So she did it. Maybe. He looked thoughtful. But something bothered me. What? When we mentioned the surveillance footage, she wasn't shocked. She looked scared. There's a difference. 2 days later, the lab finally identified the fingerprints. Harris called me into his office. He closed the door before speaking. We have a name. I held my breath. Who? He slid a file across the desk. I looked down. The photograph showed a man in his early 40s. Heavy beard. Weathered face. I had never seen him before. Who is he? His name is Victor Sloan. I don't know him. No. Harris nodded slowly. But your father does. The room fell silent. He worked with your father for almost 15 years. I stared at the photo. He was recently fired. Why? Financial misconduct. My heart pounded. So my father knows the man whose fingerprints were on the gas can? Yes. And Victor called your father's cell phone 3 times the day before your house burned down. I could barely breathe. Everything I believed was shifting again. Emily wasn't standing alone anymore. There was someone else in this. Someone with a direct connection to my father. Someone who had no reason to target me, unless someone had asked him to. Detective Harris looked me straight in the eye, then quietly said the words I had been dreading. We believe your family's financial problems were only part of the motive. He paused. We've uncovered evidence suggesting they were hiding something far bigger than debt. I'd barely noticed the drive home after Detective Harris told me there was something bigger than debt. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. 4 weeks, I'd convinced myself this was about money. Emily was drowning in debt. Dad had made terrible financial decisions. Mom was helping them cover it all up. It was ugly, but it made sense. Now Detective Harris was telling me that money wasn't the whole story. There was something else. Something they had been willing to destroy my home to protect. The next morning, Harris called before I even poured my coffee. We picked up Victor Sloan. My heart skipped. He confessed. Not exactly. So why call me? Because he started talking. 2 hours later, I sat across from Harris and Investigator Mills. Victor had refused to let me sit in on the interview, but they summarized everything. He admitted meeting your father. How many times? Several. He admitted accepting cash. For what? Harris sighed. He says your father hired him for a construction job. I laughed bitterly. A construction job involving gasoline? He claims he didn't know the house belonged to you. I looked at him. You believe that? No. Victor's story kept changing. First, he said he was hired to clean out an abandoned property. Then he claimed he thought the owners wanted an insurance payout. Finally, after nearly 6 hours of questioning, he admitted one critical fact. He had been inside my house the night it burned. What happened after that? I asked. Harris opened another folder. He refuses to answer. So we're stuck. No. He smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Because Victor wasn't as careful as he thought. Investigators had recovered his phone, deleted messages, location history, payment records, everything. One message had been erased just minutes after the fire. The forensic lab recovered it anyway. It was from my father. Make sure nothing survives upstairs. I stared at the printed message. What was upstairs? My bedroom. My home office. The attic. Boxes of old family records. Photo albums. Legal files. Tax returns. Everything I'd kept for years. Karen Mills slid another document toward me. This is what we think they wanted destroyed. It was an old probate file. I frowned. My grandmother's estate. Karen nodded. You recognize it? Of course. When she died, everything was divided equally. That's what everyone believed. She looked at me carefully. Until we opened the original records. I suddenly remembered something. The week after Grandma's funeral, Dad had insisted on handling all the paperwork. He told me not to worry. I'll take care of everything. I trusted him. I always trusted him. Karen pointed to a handwritten amendment attached to the original will. This page disappeared from every copy except the one stored at the courthouse. I leaned forward. The amendment was dated just 3 months before Grandma died. It changed everything. Grandma hadn't divided her property equally. She had left me something separately. Her lakefront cabin, an investment account, and most importantly, 40% ownership in a piece of undeveloped land outside town. Land that had been worth almost nothing 15 years earlier. Today, Karen looked at me. A commercial developer offered over $4.8 million for it. I couldn't speak. Dad had never told me. Instead, he continued managing the property as if it belonged entirely to him. Over the years, he borrowed against it, refinanced it, used it as collateral, signed documents he never should have been allowed to sign. The only thing that could expose him was the original paperwork. Paperwork that I'd unknowingly stored in boxes in my attic after cleaning out Grandma's house. The exact place his message told Victor to destroy. Make sure nothing survives upstairs. It wasn't about memories. It wasn't about revenge. It was about evidence. Everything suddenly made sense. Emily asking about my insurance, checking my home's value, forging my signature, trying to make it look like I was desperate for money. If the fire had been ruled accidental, everyone would assume I'd simply lost important documents. No one would ever question why the inheritance records disappeared. It had been planned. Every step. 3 days later, Victor finally broke. His attorney negotiated a plea agreement. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he told investigators everything. He described the meeting at an old warehouse outside town. Dad had offered him cash. Emily supplied information about my schedule. She knew exactly when I'd be working late. She knew where I hid my spare key. Victor entered through the back door. He poured gasoline in the kitchen, the hallway, the staircase. Then he climbed upstairs. Dad's instructions were clear. Find the storage boxes. Burn everything. Victor claimed he never expected the fire to spread as quickly as it did. I thought the firefighters would stop it. Harris shook his head after reading that statement. That's the lie he tells himself. The arrests happened early on a Thursday morning. I didn't watch. I couldn't. Instead, Marcus called me. They've got them. I looked out the window of my rental house. Police cars filled my parents' driveway. Emily came out first. She was crying. Dad wasn't. He walked with his head high until an officer placed handcuffs on him. Only then did his shoulders slump. Mom looked completely lost. For the first time in my life. They looked like people facing consequences instead of people expecting someone else to clean up their mess. 2 months later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, neighbors, curious strangers. The prosecutor built the case piece by piece. Financial records, phone calls, GPS data, recovered text messages, forensic evidence. Then came Victor. He testified for nearly 6 hours. His voice shook as he described every meeting, every payment, every instruction. Finally, the prosecutor asked, "Who hired you?" Victor looked across the courtroom, straight at my father. He did. The room fell silent. Dad eventually took the stand. For a moment, I wondered if he'd finally tell the truth. Instead, he blamed everyone else. Victor was lying. Emily misunderstood. The investigators were biased. Even I was somehow responsible. At one point, he looked directly at me. "You always thought you were better than us." I slowly stood when the judge allowed me to testify. "No," I said quietly. "I just thought family meant something." The courtroom became so quiet I could hear someone crying in the gallery. Emily's testimony was even harder to watch. She admitted asking about my insurance. She admitted looking at my property. She admitted lying to detectives, but she insisted she never wanted anyone hurt. I thought it would just be a small fire. The prosecutor didn't raise his voice. He simply asked, "So why did you tell Victor your brother kept important records upstairs?" Emily stared at the table. She never answered. The jury deliberated for less than 7 hours. The verdicts came one after another. Victor Sloan, guilty of arson, conspiracy, and destruction of property. Emily Carter, guilty of conspiracy, fraud, attempted financial theft, and obstruction of justice. Then came my father. The courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Guilty on all counts. Arson, conspiracy, fraud, forgery, evidence tampering. The judge later called it one of the most calculated family betrayals he'd seen in decades. Mom wasn't convicted of arson, but she was found guilty of helping conceal financial records and lying to investigators. After the trial ended, I walked outside alone. The sun was setting behind the courthouse. Marcus caught up with me. "You okay?" I looked toward the parking lot. "I don't know. You won." I shook my head. It doesn't feel like winning. Because it wasn't. Justice isn't the same as getting your family back. There was no celebration, no happy reunion, only truth. Sometimes that's all life gives you. Months later, the insurance settlement finally closed. With the criminal case finished, there were no more delays. I rebuilt, not on the same lot. I couldn't. Every corner of that property reminded me of smoke. Instead, I bought a smaller home 20 miles away. Nothing fancy, just peaceful. When the moving truck left, I carried one last box inside. The probate documents, the original inheritance papers. I placed them in a fireproof safe bolted to the foundation. Then I locked it, not because I was afraid anymore, because some lessons never leave you. The developer eventually completed the purchase of Grandma's land. After taxes and legal fees, my share was enough to pay off the new house outright. I donated part of the money to the local fire department. The same firefighters who had risked their lives trying to save a home they never had a chance to save. They invited me to the station a few weeks later. One of the firefighters recognized me immediately. "We're glad to see you're doing better." I smiled. "So am I." About a year after the trial, I received one final letter. It was from Emily. I stared at the envelope for almost an hour before opening it. Inside were 3 handwritten pages. No excuses. No blaming Dad. No asking for money. Just one sentence that stayed with me. I kept telling myself we were protecting the family, until I realized we were destroying the only person who was actually acting like family. I folded the letter and put it away. I never replied. Forgiveness and reconciliation aren't always the same thing. I chose peace instead. People sometimes ask if I hate them. The truth surprises them. I don't. Hate is heavy. I'd already carried enough weight through ashes, investigations, courtrooms, and betrayal. I finally decided to put it down. The fire took my house. My family chose to take my trust. But neither of them got to take my future. And every time I unlock the front door of the home I built with honesty instead of lies, I'm reminded that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what was truly worth keeping.